breathe into a chunk of cold stone. But I look at it now, and it seems just a rock, ideally proportioned, not a flaw on its surface, painfully perfect. As lifeless and boring as a boulder at the roadside.
Well, I've done it. I've officially completed Hearts of Stone, the first DLC of Witcher 3, and I have some thoughts about this. I'm only about 10 years late to it, but let's kind of review it, and then I'll rank some categories of this expansion DLC. So instead of going through like basic categories like graphics, world design, etc., because a lot of it is similar to the base game because it's DLC, we'll do that at the end, but instead I want to go through kind of my own made-up categories and talk about this DLC in general. So things that stand out is the DLC wasn't very long. I think I completed it like every main quest and side quest in just about 13, 14 hours, and it was a shorter, very tightly developed, let's call it, DLC. But the first thing I want to talk about is the story, because it seems like that is obviously, you know, the main part of this DLC. So instead of like a massive expansion to the world itself, this expansion is actually kind of built into the regular map. And like I said, it's not very long, but it also feels very clean and very well managed. It's not like the developers just added a lot of slop content to add slop content and make it 50 hours long. They did it 13-ish hours because they wanted to make it clean and precise. For some reason, I felt a very different vibe and aesthetic from this DLC versus the base game. The base game seemed a lot more warm and kind of fantasy-like throughout it, and this one felt like almost a fantasy gone wrong, and it had almost like, it's hard to explain, like a fairy tale mixed with a horror. And I still remember the opening scene or opening start of the DLC when you enter the manor to look for Olgierd von Everec. And man, I'll just play the clip and then you can feel the atmosphere coming from that. When I entered that manor, and all of a sudden you're looking, it's almost as if you're looking at like a fairy tale gone wrong, and then there's a thunderstorm, and my stomach almost turned to it, being like, oh man, I'm very excited, but this also looks like it's gonna be something a bit terrifying, and that's exactly what it was. In general, the story wasn't very long, but it was very clean and precise, and I can actually really appreciate that about a DLC, that it's short and well crafted.
Known also as Master Mirror, we met in White Orchard. I helped you find your Yennefer. We meet again.
So now our second category about what really stands out in this DLC to me is the antagonist, Gaunter O'Dim, Master Mirror, if you will. So he is, I think, the star of this DLC, and the reason it's become so infamous for a couple different reasons. He's such a terrifying character, and he's literally a wolf in sheep clothing, because he's not intimidating in the sense that he's like this monster, this ferocious monster with unbelievable abilities, or a scary boss with a terrifying weapon. That's not what it's about. It's his ability to like manipulate people and pretty much make them sell their soul to others. And that sounds like the most terrifying thing possible. And that's exactly what he does. Something about his presence and his dialogue in the DLC make him way more terrifying than that of like a normal enemy or boss in a game. And that was actually one valid criticism I heard of Witcher 3, the base game, that I didn't think about until I read somebody's comment that said the Wild Hunt wasn't exactly the perfect antagonist in the game because it was such a broad general thing and we didn't really know much about them. It wasn't really one specific terrifying person. It was like this general group of enemies that didn't really have a whole lot of backstory, or we didn't really hear enough about. And this is the complete opposite. In Hearts of Stone, they use Gaunter O'Dim, the one guy, as the real antagonist, and they made him pretty much as terrifying as possible. But not, like I said, not with his strength or his weapons or his powers, but more about his presence and his ability to manipulate and pretty much make people sell their souls. So my third category as to why this DLC stood out in my mind so much is the whole cast of characters. It wasn't just Geralt and Gaunter O'Dim. There was also, of course, Olgierd von Everick, who I thought was going to be the main antagonist, but that was not the case. There was Shawnee. There was Olgierd's brother. All these people played an important role in very different roles in setting the atmosphere, depending on who you were talking to. Olgierd was very mute and, I don't know, emotionally repressed or suppressed, and then Shawnee was kind of the more humanizing, normal character that brought more of like an actual warm sense of life into the DLC. And then Olgierd's brother did the same thing, where he was the humorous character in a whole different way. So I really enjoyed how they used so many different characters and actually had them meaningfully in the game and made them attached to the main story, and every character felt very memorable. And I know, looking back on this DLC now after completing it, there's a lot of memorable moments about each character that stand out in your mind, and it wasn't just one or two scenes with each of these important characters. Like, they're memorable, important scenes that added to the story and added to the DLC, and I feel like we can really appreciate that.
Yes, 'tis I, Geralt, a witcher. Heartfelt thanks for your hospitality. I adore weddings. The brides especially. So fragrant, so tasty, I could...
Righto, I'm sure...
The next category is just going to be one whole kind of quest line and story in my mind, which is the wedding scene in Hearts of Stone. I can't explain how memorable this entire sequence was, but something about the entire wedding scene where you as Geralt go with Shawnee and have Olgierd's brother take over your body, and CDPR just did an amazing job at actually tying this into the main story, and then also letting you experience this completely like full of life wedding scene where you see Geralt in a completely different light. And I was genuinely laughing like really hard for a lot of those cutscenes at the wedding, because it was so cringe-worthy and funny at the same time, and making this actually part of the story, which the writers did, was masterfully done. Like, off the top of my head, the dancing scene was amazing, the sword fighting, the jumping into the pond and looking for a boot or something, all these parts of that wedding scene were so memorable, and I think it was one of the top parts of the entire DLC. Even though it was like, it wasn't terrifying, it wasn't fighting monsters, but it still had a very memorable aspect to it. The last made-up category I want to add in is the decision making in the end. I feel like it's so underrated when you play an RPG or play a game and you have to make a decision, but you don't really care about the decision. This was the exact opposite, where the writers did such a good job in building up the characters that you actually cared about the decision in the end. And this is a big spoiler for those of you who haven't played it and, you know, you're a bit late like me. But when you make the decision in the end to spare Olgierd or pretty much hand him over to Gaunter O'Dim, that's a decision that you genuinely care about. Not because you played with his character for like 100 hours, but because of those memorable moments, and you felt you kind of lived that character's story through that whole sequence in the mansion. And Olgierd's tale is genuinely tragic. It was actually depressing, kind of playing through that mansion and seeing him sell his soul to Gaunter O'Dim, and he got that heart of stone, and then his wife rotted away in that mansion with that terrifying caretaker watching over her and the house. But obviously, the game in the end lets you make either one of those decisions. So I really appreciated that the DLC was not very long, but well crafted, meaningful, and then I feel like the expansions to the gameplay mechanics weren't huge. I know they had the Ophiri gear and the Viper gear, which I got, which I appreciated, and was fun to use, but it wasn't massive. And then what were they called? The enchantments or something? No, what were they called? The rune rights. I didn't even bother exploring the rune right system because I looked halfway through, I looked it up on Reddit and people said they're kind of cheeks. But either way, I guess it's a cool idea to add in. But there it is. So now to just go through the quick categories to rank them out of 10. Story and writing, 10 out of 10. So well written, an amazing story. Characters and performances, voice acting, give that a 10 out of 10 as well. The quest design, 10 out of 10. Themes and emotional impact, 10 out of 10. Gameplay or added combat mechanics or progression system, I'd probably give that like an 8.5 out of 10. But all of it was so good, and another part of Witcher 3 that I'm depressed is over. But we must go on. Now, next up, we have Blood and Wine, the big one. Stay tuned. Maybe I'll post some gameplay of starting Blood and Wine, so check that out if you're interested, probably in the next couple days or whatever. But there it is, Hearts of Stone, amazing DLC. Rip all geared. I mean, not we saved it, but in general,